not just concerning Christ, but those are the ones that we'll try to emphasize, but about various other things or people as well. He, in the second paragraph, says the New Testament references to statements in the Psalms fall into two main categories. Those involving Jesus, or those which are called messianic, and they is directly related to the Messiah, Jesus, the one that the Jews were hopefully looking forward to coming, but would find their fulfillment in Jesus Christ. He then says, number two, that those not referring to Jesus, therefore touching on a place, another person, another event that might take place. He says there are 83 different citations, and just to make sure I went down and counted them all, he does have 83 listed, as you see on the bottom and to the next page, beginning with Psalm 2 on the left, and then another one on the next column. And all of these have relationship to something that's found in the New Testament. So if we see Old Testament prophecies being fulfilled in the New, bring you back. So you might recognize that Jay is one of the ones who has the flu symptoms. But again, we're trying to see that if an Old Testament passage, not just the Psalms, finds a fulfillment or a statement in the New Testament, much like Jesus would say, this is that which was written by the prophet, or as the prophet said, this is fulfilled. And so it gives us a greater understanding of the tie or the connection between Old and New Testament. That being said, that's the importance of the Old Testament. We can't understand everything about the Old or the New Testament.
Sorry. This may be loud before I get back there.
Yes, it is.
Sorry.
Yes, it is. I'll wait. We can't understand completely the New Testament. That says 7 on it. I don't know if that's the highest number. It's off for right now. Still sounds loud to me. Okay. That all depends on their ears as far as how loud it is. Again, we were emphasizing the need of studying the Old Testament in order to completely understand the New, to be able to comprehend that God, through thousands of years, was able to put things together, to have them recorded, and then to see them fulfilled in the New Testament is really beyond our comprehension. Because we can't tell the future. We can't prophesy. We can't know what's going to happen in the next few moments, how loud this microphone's going to get or whatever the case may be. But we can know from the Scriptures that as we see from this writer, the fulfillment of so many variety of ways, these Psalms that are included from the Old Testament and then found in the New. You can take a time sometime later to go down and see the comparison. He said he gives the Old Testament Psalm, where it's located, and then the New Testament reference to it as well. If you have a Bible that has footnotes or cross references, many times it will cite
where it's found in the Old Testament. And at the bottom of page 144, he shows the number of times and the most places that it's found as far as references from the Psalms. Why do you suppose that Hebrews would win out on top? That there are 19 references to the Old Testament found in the book of Hebrews. All right. All right. It was written to those Hebrews who had become Christians, and therefore they would be familiar with it. And now he's trying to use those same Psalms, or what they would consider their first Bible, as a weapon to say, you need to remain faithful to Christ. Here are the prophecies and the statements made. Remain faithful to Christ, because even the Old Testament foretold of these things. You can go down through the number of times and see for each of these books the number of references that are going to be found there. Next page, 145. Unless Wednesday happens again and I get my papers all out of sorts. On page 145, he gives us the Psalms most often quoted in the New Testament. Two of them he points out, Psalm 118, that 12 different times in the New Testament it's quoted. 7 times is Psalm 110 quoted. He breaks it down into specific verses in the next section. But we want to emphasize now, as we get New Testament events, the middle of the page, that fulfilled prophecy in Psalms. Now, what is a prophecy? Is it a guess? Is it a maybe, or I hope so? Well, according to 2 Peter chapter 1, the last couple of verses, holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So these individuals, both Old and New Testament, had to have the Holy Spirit guiding them and directing them if these things that they say are going to be true later on. What one says comes to pass, or whether it doesn't. Now, if it doesn't come to pass, what kind of a prophet is that person? A false prophet. It's exactly how God said it would be. Then that individual is not a prophet from God. And so we need to understand that when we look at these events fulfilled, the things that happened just according to what God said, we won't touch on all of them. Somebody would read for us the first one, Matthew 13:35. You can read it right off the paper.
I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things that have been kept secret from the foundation of the world.
So, he is making a statement about what he is saying. What kind of proverbs? What kind of parables? These sayings that he is going to give. And we know passages such as Matthew 13 are full of parables. Then they're interspersed throughout the gospel accounts about all of these parables. But he says here, some of them have been kept secret. Parables were given for one of two reasons. Either to cause those that wanted to understand and come to a knowledge of what he said will grasp it, or at least come to Jesus and say, what does this mean? And then there was on the other side those that simply just didn't want to hear it at all. Many of you probably have had family gatherings, a lot of people together. How hard is it to hear everybody if they're speaking at one time and to discern and to understand what's being said? Well, for some people they could care less. Well, if that's this person, I don't really care what they're saying. Don't want to listen to them. But here is Jesus in fulfilling these prophecies that is the master teacher. And so what he says is of great value. And if it makes us stop and think, what does that mean? Then we ought to have the courage and the desire to say, explain. He gives a number of others, and he goes down and he usually says that the Scripture might be fulfilled. What would happen to the integrity of, whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament, what would happen to the integrity of the Scriptures if only one of these prophecies failed to come true? Would it not cast doubt upon whether God knew what was going to happen? Wouldn't it cast doubt on us believing God is all-knowing? And so we have to be those that have that assurance and that trust, not just from the Psalms, as we see in this lesson, of that it might be fulfilled, but to apply that same principle to each and every part of the Scriptures. Any comments as we get down to this part or through this part? All right, next page, 146. The importance of us seeing that Jesus Christ is portrayed in the Psalms. I have probably a number of pictures in my desk that have been drawn by little ones that show me preaching. Now, I doubt very seriously if you were to hold it up, you would say, that's you. Because it was done by a child. They may not fully grasp all these things as far as drawing a portrait. But the psalmist, especially here, is going to give us not a physical representation of Jesus, but from a spiritual standpoint so that we can see who He is. Hebrews 12, verse 2. Hebrews 12, verse 2.
Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
There were many who didn't want to, and if they did look at Jesus, they didn't see Him as the one that He claimed to be. They denied Him, they rejected Him, they attributed His works to Beelzebub. Anything that they could do to change this portrait, so to speak, they would try to accomplish because they didn't want others to follow Him or to look at Him. So under the first section he says this portrait of Christ is that He is the hope of Israel. The history of Israel or the Hebrews began How far back in the Old Testament? Who did they claim to be their father? Abraham. Genesis chapter 12. God made certain promises unto Abraham in these first 4 verses of Genesis 12. And one was that through him all the earth would be blessed. And so the hope that the Old Testament people had was in the Messiah to come. It wasn't in Abraham himself. Because when we look at Hebrews chapter 11, that hall of the faithful, it says of those individuals that these all died not having received the promise. And so they had to look for someone else to come. But Jesus Christ is not only for us today the only hope, but was also the only hope for the Old Testament people. What was one of John's phrases that he used to prepare the people for Jesus? Believe on him who is to come. John says, don't believe in me, but believe on the one that I'm preaching to you about. Because he is that only hope that anyone before him or after him can ever have. Where does our hope reside? Where do we find that trust and that assurance? He then goes down and he looks at a number of the Psalms. Again, we won't look at every one of them. We'll touch on a few of them to show that each one of these is painting that portrait about Jesus Christ, the hope of Israel. If somebody would read Psalm 68:18 on our paper. It's just the first sentence in quotes.
You have ascended on high, you have led captivity captive, you have received or given gifts among men.
So here is a statement that would really pique the interest of the Israelites. They have had kings come and go, they have had captivities, and they've had enemies that they faced. And now for this psalm to say that there's going to be one who is going to captivity captive is in a real sense, he's going to set you free from that bondage. That they would think, where is he? Who is he? When is he going to be here? But this psalm gives them that hope that regardless of where they are, what captivity they might be under, that there's hope. Psalm 118, we'll drop down a couple. Psalm 118:26, again, just the statement in quotes. To come in the name of means to be by that authority. We know that Jesus Christ was sent by the Father. He came to do His will. And therefore He says, the one who comes, regrettably, and it's still true today in some religious circles, what hope did the Israelites really want? Was it physical? Was it spiritual? Who were they under as far as control in the first century? Rome. They didn't enjoy freedom like they wanted. They were still at the beck and call of the Roman government. And so when they read these Psalms many times, they would think about a nationalistic or a military force, a king who's going to come and he's going to deliver us from Rome. That same thing is still true today as people think about the Israel of our day and age, that they think the Messiah is still going to return and he's going to give them freedom from all worldly powers. But he says here, this has been fulfilled. In this portrait of Jesus Christ as the only hope, it must be seen that he brought that and he provides it for them. But it's a spiritual type of hope. Anything about Christ in this portrait as far as the hope of Israel? All right, next page 147 then. The next piece of this portrait, Christ, an unlikely king. In Matthew chapter 2, Herod, as he comes in contact with these wise men, wants them to do what?
Report back to him.
Sir?
Report back to him.
All right. You go find him and bring him back with the quote, that I can come worship him too.
He also tried to determine the time that this other king appeared. So he had a secret meeting, so he was trying to pull information out of them.
Right.
And then he was also then trying to get them to give more information later on to go worship him.
That's right. But he understood with the wise men, is my position being threatened because I'm supposed to be in charge? But where is he that is born King of the Jews? And so he feels threatened from a physical standpoint that somebody's going to take his place. But as we read these Psalms, Jesus isn't the type of king that they thought he would be. John chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. John 1, 11 and 12.
He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name.
Everything about the life of Christ, from birth till death, gave no hint that he was going to be the type of king that the political machine in the first century wanted. He came to his own, but they received him not. He had a lowly birth, didn't have any place that he could really call home. None of the things that would show the royalty that they were expecting. But each of these Psalms is showing to us that he's still going to become that king. Pilate's question, when it comes to the matter of truth, had to deal with the matter of being a king. What did he write and place it above the head of Jesus when he was crucified? Did he not write the King of the Jews? Wrote it in 3 main languages. But he says of the Jews. He wanted to associate it with just them. But this picture that the psalmist draws for us, even on the next page, goes into his death, burial, and resurrection. to show us that God knew what he was going to go through in order to become that king, whether they liked it or not. The third portrait on page 148, he says, from the Psalms we can get Christ and the case for inspiration. The inspiration of the Scriptures is forcefully demonstrated when things unlikely or impossible are foretold to happen. Sometime later will actually take place. The Psalms, as well as numerous other sources in the Old Testament, are replete with predictions having to do with Christ and His divinity. And only if there's that heavenly origin can we find these things to be true, if not by inspiration. He gives, first of all, Psalm 110, verse 4. If somebody would read the quotes. So that begs the question, who is Melchizedek? All right. One that Abraham came in contact with, used quite often in the book of Hebrews. But again, here is the importance of knowing some things about the Old Testament to understand what the New Testament is saying. What was peculiar as far as the statement made about Melchizedek? All right, he served priest and king, but it's stated in such a way that he had no beginning, no father or mother, so to speak. But Melchizedek was before the Old Testament law of Moses. Who were to be the priests, or from what tribe were the priest and the high priest under the Mosaic law to be found? All right, Levi. From what tribe did Jesus come from? Judah. And so it's a break from what these people were used to. Jesus wasn't going to be the earthly king, nor was he going to be an earthly priest, because the portrait doesn't fit. According to the Old Testament law, he had no right. But he says that bringing in of a better covenant changed all these things. And so the statements here about the inspiration concerning him being priest, high priest. Then as the page ends, Psalm 41 verse 9.
Can we go back just one?
Oh yes, sir. No problem.
So I find something interesting is because, Abraham is kind of the line of the Jews. That's where Moses came from. Moses is where the law came from. And of course, Abraham is the ancestor. So that's
Correct.
Abraham's a big, big deal. But during his life, Abraham paid, he paid money to Melchizedek. I forget the word I wanted to use. Right? So Abraham is recognizing Melchizedek's superior position as
Right.
a priest and as a king. So he's recognizing that in a greater than Abraham for honor and position. And so now Jesus is saying that his credentials isn't coming through the Levitical priesthood, through the Mosaic law, because he's from the wrong tribe, right? But his is coming from Melchizedek, which Abraham paid
Ties through him.
honor to
Right.
him. So it's actually saying that his priestly credentials are higher than that of a Levite.
Because if you go back, the Old Testament law, the Levites were said to have, in a sense, paid through to Melchizedek, recognizing him, as you're saying, as being greater than. But Jesus then is greater than all of them. So leaving the law out on both sides, you have Melchizedek and you have Christ, and you have Christ, and therefore the doing away of that Old Testament Levitical priesthood.
And then Jesus being from the tribe of Judah would give him credentials to be a king.
Mhm.
And then through his relationship with Melchizedek, it would be a relationship to be a priest, which is both of Melchizedek.
Right, so you have both of those in him, priest and king. Correct. Back to Psalm 41, verse 9. Somebody would read the quote.
Even mine own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me.
So, if David is making this statement, who is he talking about? Ahithophel. So, when we look at the New Testament, how do we see the fulfillment with Jesus? Who is the betrayer? Judas. And so, in looking from one to the other, the similarity is quite clear. That the New Testament makes use of this situation and says, look at Judas. John chapter 13, he was there. Jesus considered him his friend. They ate together, but he went against him. How many years, again, was David before Christ? Around 1,000. So 1,000 years passes before this psalm sees its fulfillment in Jesus. You can look at the others and make the comparison as far as the other things that he does with the portraits that are given to make us be able to see Jesus clearer from the Psalms. At the bottom of page 149, he says there are references from the Psalms which don't specifically relate to Jesus Christ. And last sentence says we'll look at it in two main categories. First of all, the wickedness of man, and then secondly, the worthiness of God, which in a very real sense brings us back to Psalm 1 where we began as far as blessed is the man, and then those who walk in the counsel of God. So on page 150, he gives Psalm 5, 10, 140, 36, and 53. That's just a sampling as far as man and his deeds. Now, simply because God makes a prophecy does not rule out man's free will. God can paint a picture about man in generalities and describe for us here the wickedness of man. He goes through and gives us the psalm, and then he shows the quotation. A number of them, maybe even all of them, are from the book of Romans in chapter 3. But it describes man pretty much to a T as far as the way that we live and behave, unless our life is changed by Jesus Christ. He ends up with the paragraph under the wickedness of man by saying, it's obvious from these and similar statements in the Psalms, the psalmist recognized that man is in need of God because of our sin. As he concludes in Romans 3, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So they, like anyone else, could only escape from God's wrath through lifelong efforts to be righteous. So from the Psalms being 1,000 years to the time of Jesus and Paul, as these writings take place until our day and age, the picture is over and over again the same thing. But because of this next section, the worthiness of God, man can become different. We can become those that want to and desire to have that righteous relationship with God. Again, he goes through and he quotes many of the Psalms. Hopefully you'll take time, if you haven't already, to look at each one of these and see just how important God must be, as he was in the life of the psalmist, for us today. The earth is the Lord's and all of its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. God is the creator of all things. He's the giver of life and the sustainer of it. Again, God doesn't need us to be God. But he created us in such a way that we ought to want to love him in return for all that he's done, because he's worthy of our love and our worship and our adoration. In Psalm 95, as the page ends, he swore in his wrath, "They shall not enter into my rest." God's love and compassion and kindness to bless those who are following him must be also seen in the opposite to those who are disobedient, who are desirous of living any way that they want to, because it would be unjust if he did not punish. How would we feel if God overlooked the sins of others and did not do anything to punish them? What incentive would that be then for us to live a different kind of life? That therein lies a very fatal flaw in once saved, always saved. Because if you've been saved by that doctrine, you can live any way that you want to and not have to suffer any repercussions from it. But God blesses his children, and he punishes, from whatever section of the Scriptures you want to look, the evildoers, those who are rebellious against his will. At the bottom of page 151, he lists some that are described as messianic psalms. He says that they are with titles that may be associated or given. Psalm 16, the hope of the faithful and the Messiah's victory. Psalm 22, the suffering, praise, and posterity of the Messiah. To me, I think it's very interesting when you read Psalm 22 of all that Jesus has to suffer and go through. And then on the heels of it, we have Psalm 23 of the answer to many of the difficulties and the problems exist in 22 as far as what Jesus must endure. Psalm 45, the glories of the Messiah and his bride. Psalm 72, the glory and universality of the Messiah's reign. Psalm 10, the announcement of his reign. We've gotten to the end of the lesson. The next page simply contains the review questions. But are there any comments or questions about any of our study this morning? If not, then we'll let the bell stand and we'll call it quits on that then.